once again. This is Nuance. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Mike Scala, and we'll be speaking about the National Guard troops deployed by New York's governor to the subway system. I would like to introduce our co-host, Jay Carter, also known as Timid, the hip-hop artist and the chair of BLM Tokyo, with a mouthful of something. What's going on, Jay?
Yeah, peanuts. So, yeah, just caught off guard a little bit by the time change because we don't do time changes out here.
Hold on a second. Got a little bit of echo. Okay, corrected that. Yeah, I was hoping that wasn't going to throw you off too much. I guess, are out of daylight savings now. It's so confusing even to keep track of whether we're in or out of daylight savings. I know people just memorize the fall back, spring forward thing. So the clocks went ahead this past week in New York. I saw a funny meme saying, why do we have to do it in the middle of the night on the weekend? Why can't we do it at like 4 p.m. on a Monday?
True. Yeah. It's funny because uh apparently I'm thinking about it now. A good portion of my life, I wasn't affected by daylight savings time.
Hmm.
So I've been here 11 years now, and then I lived in Hawaii for about 13 years, and Hawaii doesn't do daylight savings time either.
Wow.
So
Yeah, and
yeah.
we're trying to get rid of it. I think we found that it was a popular idea generally to do away with it or to make it permanent, right? Again, it's confusing. Is it permanent? Is it never there? But the idea being you don't change the clocks, right? You just pick one time and stick with it.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I don't know which one is the original time and which one is it.
right? And maybe that's a problem in itself. Maybe that speaks symbolically to something even bigger. We don't even know what time it really is.
And it disrupts people. It disrupts their sleeping. It disrupts mentally. That it just does have a lot of effects when
For
they change
sure.
the time on people and alter their schedules like that. Even though it's just an hour,
Yeah,
it
no
does have
question.
effects.
I mean, even these past few days, I've been staying up a lot later thinking, why am I up so late? Oh, of course, because I really think my body feels like it's an hour earlier because it really is,
Right.
aside from this arbitrary time shifting that we did. So
Right.
it is a good day. I'll say that today. Any day where the Senate allocates $10 million towards your project, I would think would be considered a good day.
Yeah, I saw that post. So it does sound like a pretty good thing. So that allows the what was it? Environmental study to go forward?
Right. So I know a lot of people have this question: how come you're studying this again? Of course, we're talking about the Queens Link, which is formerly the Queens Rail, formerly the Rockaway Beach Line. People have been fighting for this for a very long time. In fact, the line was decommissioned in the 60s, right? So you can get the idea that it's a generational battle at this point. And so one of the first questions that comes up is, why do you need to study this again? Hasn't this been studied enough, right? But the EIS is called the Environmental Impact Statement, is a necessary legal step in the process of moving forward with an infrastructure project such as this. So it isn't studying it just to do another study. It would be the next phase of actually building the project. Before it could be built, that study would need to be completed. Now, what we saw just now is the Senate in New York included $10 million for this study in their Senate One House, they call it. So it's their proposed budget. What happens in the budget process here is the governor will propose a state budget. Then each house, the Senate and the Assembly, will also put together their own document outlining what their budget would look like, right? If it was up to them, like this is what we propose. And then it needs to be reconciled, right? So obviously they'll start with the governor's suggestions and say, okay, we're going to maybe use it as an outline or a skeleton and change some things. We're going to add some things, take some things away. We can make these modifications. The Assembly will do the same thing. And then you ultimately need to have one document that passes both houses and is signed by the governor, and that becomes the final budget, right? So this is an iteration of that process. We've gotten the executive budget from the governor. This is the Senate's proposed budget. The Assembly has their own. The Queens Link funding has not been included in the Assembly version, but as I said, these documents will need to be reconciled. And so the struggle now is going to be to get the Assembly to get on board with what the Senate has proposed and put it in the final document that comes out.
So the money hasn't been allocated yet. It's just one one faction is like, yeah, we can move forward this. Now you got to get the other people on board. So
Correct. The Senate,
comment,
right. The Senate put it in their proposed budget.
right. So in the comments, there's a question on if that 10 million is just for the study or is that also to take part in the building?
No, that's just for the study.
Okay. $10 million just for the study? Wow.
Yeah. But there's also a lot of confusion about what goes into that. When they say an environmental study, people
Right.
tend to think, oh, you're checking pollution, you're checking the damage to the environment. It's not just the environment in the big sense that we think of it, right? In the abstract sense. We're talking about what it does to the environment of that land, right? Meaning
Right.
the people who live there, what effect does it
Right.
have on them, on everything down to parking, noise, resources being strained,
Right.
crime even potentially. It's these environments. It's not just how much pollution does it add to the earth, right? It's
Right.
look at the environment of this particular area and figure out, number one, if it's safe to do, if it can be done in accordance with existing law, or what would need to be done in order to get it to that point. Because if they're going to build something ambitious like that, they need to look at it very carefully and thoroughly and figure out what needs to be done, what accommodations would need to be made. Do you need to build sound barriers in certain places? Do you need to
Right.
look out for, I don't know, leakages, gas mains, like anything that you could think of that this could interfere with, right? Quality of life issues. So you need to make sure that you're doing it in a way that doesn't harm the environment, certainly not to the point of breaking any laws or regulations. And again, when I say the environment, I'm not talking about people thinking like EPA. It's not that. That's not what we're talking, right? It's everything, all the factors that will affect people's lives who live around there.
Right. Absolutely. Another comment, the Democrats have both houses. Why is there a struggle?
Well, it isn't always a partisan fight, right? This isn't
Right.
something where all the Democrats will support, all the Republicans will oppose, and vice versa. In fact, if you
Right.
look at the support the Queens Link has, you find a very wide coalition ideologically of
Mm.
elected officials on board with this, right? From the most progressive. I mean, you got Jumaane Williams, public advocate of New York City, solidly a leftist, right, in New York City politics. And then you've got conservatives. You even have a Republican or two support. And when I say that, you have to keep in mind that there aren't that many Republicans in New York City. So to have a few on board, that represents actually a large share of their voting power in the city. And you have the more conservative, more moderate Democrats as well. And so it really is a strong local issue more than anything. I think the battle
Right.
is not to convince people of different partisan stripes the need for it. I think it's more showing
Different
why
neighborhoods.
yeah, why it's good for the whole state, right? Because you're trying to get money from the state. You got to get support from people even upstate who might not understand why they should be fighting for money in a budget to help the New York City subway system. They're like, listen, you guys have trains already. We're trying to fight for our things up here. And so you have to
Right.
make that connection to them. Why is it good for everyone, right? And that's really the struggle here. But if you look at the support along the actual right of way, it's very solid. I mean, almost every elected official who represents an area adjacent to that line supports the plan.
Well, it's good news. It's good, good step. Hopefully, they get the next part and then the full thing can get underway.
Yeah, and I don't believe someone, who's a historian on this can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't recall any time in history where that funding was allocated, even through one of the proposed budgets, right? They call them the one house budgets by either the Senate or the Assembly. It might have
Hmm.
happened at some point. I can't recall that, right? So even the fact that the Senate put that $10 million in their proposed budget, that in
Hmm.
itself, I think, represents a big step in this, because oftentimes it takes years to get things through both houses, not just with money, with the law, any kind of legislation, anything that they're voting, anything that they're doing, right? Oftentimes what you'll see is it gets proposed by someone who strongly supports it in one house, let's say, and then it gets assigned to a committee. And then maybe the chair of the committee puts it on the agenda, maybe not, right? Maybe it just sits in that committee's folder and doesn't go anywhere for that year. But let's say, you fight for it, you get it on the committee list, and then you get it past that committee. Then it either goes to another committee, like let's say there's a financial component, it'll get flagged for the finance committee, or if it gets through committee, it can get to the floor of the House. Let's say it's, again, the Senate we're talking here. now it's really in the hands of the majority leader of the Senate to advance it beyond that point. So just getting it through committee. And so this process can take several years. Maybe 1 year you get it through committee, but it doesn't even get a vote on the floor. Maybe you keep doing that. Maybe every year for 5 years, it keeps getting through these committees, but never gets a vote. And then maybe you're eventually able to convince the majority leader to put it up for a vote, or the speaker of the assembly on the assembly side to put it up for a vote. And then maybe it passes the one house, and that's a big win, but it never got through the other house. And then so it doesn't become law, it doesn't actually become implemented, but you're seeing the progress as the years go on. And really, these battles are often long. I mean, I can tell you stories about legislation we got passed that it took several years to get to the finish line. And so it is monumental to get it included even in this one document, because if it doesn't get into the final budget this year, it's momentum going forward. Next year, we can say, all right, guys, the Senate did it last year. Let's put it back on the Senate document. Oh, and by the way, the Assembly, now you guys are up, right? The Senate is showing now 2 years running that they want this. Where are you guys on this? How come you guys haven't moved on this, right? And it allows us to put more pressure on the other side if we need to say, listen, let's get this done. You already have one house, do it. And the Senate is oftentimes the harder house to get things passed through, right? So to have that, it speaks volumes to, I think, the momentum that we have. And it could happen this year. And if it doesn't, I think it's still good momentum going forward.
Right. And it's reason to be optimistic about the project because we've talked a lot about it. There's a lot of people just like, yeah, it's been going on since the 60s or whatever it is that, it's never going to happen. But this shows that there is some reason to be optimistic about it. So,
right. Absolutely. And that's important because this is all happening in the context of the city moving forward with phase one of the park only plan, right? Queens Link is the rails plus trails plan. We're the compromise. We want both. There's a competing parks only plan that seeks to block transit on the line. And the city has allocated money to build the first phase of that. Now, we always said that doesn't have to be the first phase of the parks only plan. Since we're calling for rails plus trails, that money can be used to be the first phase of our plan as well, as long as you get that transit component in as well, right? Because we want park land to be built up too. So let's integrate these things. Let's build it all together. With that said, the money that was allocated for the parks only plan doesn't include any transit in there. And so some people will look at it like, oh, the city already chose sides on this. The city is already going for that parks only plan. And that means that they don't want the train. People will tell you, well, the MTA doesn't grade it that highly when they review all these projects that they might build. They don't really seem to want the train. And so there will be these naysayers who say that there's just no real tangible support for it, in spite of all the political support that we've attained, right? This is another step, I think, in the right direction to show, yes, there is some real tangible support there in the form of $10 million, right? When people say, I got 10 million reasons why you're wrong, so there you go.
Did you come up with that slogan, rails plus trails?
It sounds like something a rapper will come up with, right?
Right. That's what I was thinking.
No,
Oh,
no,
okay.
I can't take credit for that one.
Another question in the comments. Will new jobs be created with that 10 million if it does get funded? Or is this used in agencies studying, or is it just used in agencies studying these nuances? I
Well,
tried.
now usually with an EIS, they will outsource it. So it's not fully conducted by an agency.
Oh, that's good news too, though.
The MTA would be hiring people to do the work.
Well, that's good news then. So it would provide for jobs, maybe not new jobs, but agencies and businesses that are already in business doing these
Yeah,
types of
exactly.
studies,
Right. The people who do
furthering contracts and things
that
like
type of
that.
work. Yeah.
Yeah. So
But it's a good point. I do support the notion that to the extent possible, we should be giving this work to people who have a stake in it, right? It's one way to guard against gentrification, for example. If you
right.
bring new upgrades, new infrastructure to an area? How do you ensure the people who are already invested in that area don't end up getting priced out by these upgrades? Well, one of the
Right.
things you could do is include them in the process, and you should, right, to the extent possible. So if you have people who have their own companies or contractors, people who do this type of work, who can enjoy some of the benefits of this labor, I think they should, even from this stage, right? Again, this is just the EIS phase. This isn't the building of the actual rail line. But even at this early stage, I think if it's possible, you should include local people who are in this line of work.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Sounds good.
So yeah, now the move really is to make sure that the assembly takes it up. They put it in their document and it ends up in the final budget. And I think a lot of this is going to come down to public pressure because we did, I think, use it effectively. I got to give a big shout out to the Queens Link team. They were able to put letter writing campaign functionality on the website. And I think we've used that very well because on social media now, we've accumulated many supporters who will utilize this tool to contact elected officials. I believe the governor herself has received over 200 letters from Queensland supporters. And then you hear senators, some senators and assembly members have gotten almost 50 letters already from constituents. And that is powerful, right? You might think a senator will get hundreds of letters on every issue. They really don't, not at the state level. You might see that more at the federal level when you have people all over the country, all over the world, perhaps writing them and bothering them. But how many people are really involved in state politics? First of all, you have a smaller population to deal with. You're not dealing with the whole country or the whole world. You're dealing with just that state. And even in a big state like New York, most people aren't really deeply invested in state issues like that. So for a senator or an assembly member of New York to receive 50 letters about the Queens Link, that's big. I think that moves the needle because they're really not getting that much about other things,
Right. So
we definitely got to keep this pressure on and show that it is a popular idea. We've said it all along, right? That's how you get this done, by showing that the public is behind it. This benefits to most people, and it's incumbent upon the people to speak up about it and keep speaking up about it, right? A couple of weeks ago, I talked about going to Albany and putting a flyer in every mailbox. And I think some people might have even been cynical about that, like, oh, they'll just get thrown out. Yes, I'm aware of that. I know how that works, but it's about brand recognition and awareness. So now, for example, Senator Sanders here, right, in the Senate, he's a big proponent of Queensland. So when he's putting the request in, or on the Assembly side, Stacey Pfeffer Amato or Khalil Anderson, when they're putting a request in and they're going to their colleagues in Albany and saying, hey, we request that Queensland is part of the budget. You can have all these other legislators and their staff, perhaps, who maybe not even are from Queens, but they're going to go, Queens Link? Oh, okay, yeah, I think I know about that. I've heard about that. Yeah, they might have even forgotten that they got that flyer or they saw that flyer 2 weeks ago. But it's something that you just put it in their head and you keep doing that. And then I think it does make it more likely to be supported because it's something that they're more familiar with. It isn't some strange new concept that they never heard about. Oh, who's this person in Queens who wants this Queens Link thing for that? I don't know. But if they really saw the flyer and there are some stats on there about how many people this will benefit and how it will be good for the whole region, and it has all these great possibilities like improved JFK connectivity. Well, JFK, sure, it's a Queens airport, but we know it's our major airport for the region internationally, and so that has wide-reaching implications, right? People upstate may be interested in hearing about that. So
yeah, absolutely.
They see something like that and like, okay, I can see the benefit in this. When it then gets discussed in Albany, in whatever form it's in at the time, I think it does make people more likely to go, oh yeah, Queenslink. All right, I know about that. I'm with that. All right, yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
So
Well, hopefully things move forward and it gets added uh to the full budget and yeah, it can get funded and get moved on.
yes, absolutely. It's a good day. It's a good day. It's something to celebrate. It's something
Sounds
to celebrate.
Yeah, sounds like it. So, absolutely.
All right. Well, speaking of good days, I think the consensus is the president had a good day when he gave his State of the Union address.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think Biden did a good job in his State of the Union address. He had some good lines. He was inspirational. He was on point with his facts. I think all around it was very solid. And I I think the Republican Speaker of the House, he probably got his butt kicked afterwards because he kept nodding, and you could see every time, like a lot of the time when Biden was speaking and made points, he was nodding in agreement, and they just jumped him in the back, like, "What are you doing? That was on national TV. We could see you. What are you doing?"
Right. He also clapped a few times, which
He clapped a few times.
I think
Yeah.
is pretty uncharacteristic, right, for the Republican speaker
Yeah.
to do, especially in such a polarized atmosphere that we find ourselves in. So yeah, it was interesting. I think it speaks to the president's ability to be a uniter on some of these issues and to say things that, maybe politically the guy didn't want to clap, but he kind of felt like he had to, otherwise he would look bad. Right. And
But I
so
think, and really though, like, and I'm not like downing him for nodding and clapping, because some of the things that he did say and talk about shouldn't be controversial, right?
shouldn't
If we're saying the unemployment numbers are better, if
be.
we're saying that we've spent more money on infrastructure to fix these things,
Yeah.
if we're
But
saying
that's what
these
I'm
are
saying though.
American things,
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, right? These aren't partisan issues.
right? And so that shouldn't be controversial. Now, of course, some of the more controversial issues, some of the more polarizing issues, he didn't clap and he didn't nod for. Right, when he talked, I think when Biden mentioned Roe v. Wade, trying to make that the law of the land and things like that,
Well,
he didn't make reactions then.
right.
Some of these other ones, like, it shouldn't be controversial.
Right. But he also didn't applaud or didn't even nod, didn't register any kind of approval of what Biden was doing when he brought up things that shouldn't have been controversial, but are just based on the polarized country we find ourselves in. For example, the statement, we shouldn't tolerate political violence in the US. You
Right,
would think that would be a statement everyone can agree with. Of course we shouldn't, right?
right,
But you saw him in the back roll his eyes, and the Republicans were kind of just sitting on their hands, rolling their eyes, because it was a reference to January 6th. And I think
right,
they feel like that is a card that is overplayed by the Democrats, right? They always try to downplay the seriousness of that. And so maybe the general
right,
principle of we shouldn't have political violence is agreeable, but in that context, they can't get with it.
right, right. Because to agree with that implies the fault of January 6th, and they want to try to distance themselves, which,
Yeah.
again, they shouldn't. They shouldn't. Those Republican senators and those Republican Congress people were running scared too. They were in fear for their lives in those moments too. There's not like, even though it was a conservative mob that came in, they weren't sitting there like thinking, "Oh, okay, yeah, these are my people." They were concerned as well because this is a mob infiltrating the Capitol. So
Yeah.
it shouldn't be a controversial thing either.
Right. Right. But the reaction that I saw, and I think I'm pretty good at psychology, I think that the Republicans didn't want to give that any type of credibility because they see it as a campaign strategy for
Sure.
Biden against Trump. And so they think that by clapping for that, they're implicitly saying that Biden is better than Trump in that respect.
Right. Now, I did notice a few things that he did note he did nod for, and I can't think of his name. Mike Johnson, right? When Biden was talking about that billionaires shouldn't pay less taxes than teachers, he nodded on that as well. They're gonna kick his butt back. They jumped him in the background, like they caught him in an alley or something. They got him.
Right. I think, though, overall, people were watching it maybe to look at Biden's vigor, his energy levels, his ability
Right.
to speak for an hour straight, even more
Right.
than the substance of what he was saying, right?
Right.
Because you keep hearing that he's too old. And if you believe that, and especially, again, repetition, right? You keep getting that message drilled into your head. You might have expected him to have, I don't know, fallen asleep during a speech or lost his voice or fainted something, right?
And he's
But he
Sleepy
was
Joe,
able,
right?
say what?
I said he's Sleepy Joe, right?
Right, right. But he was able to project that energy throughout the
Right.
entire address and even go off script. It wasn't just a teleprompter. He was ad-libbing. He was riffing with them a little bit, right?
Right.
And doing so with a lot of energy, and he was on point. I mean, it was like a lawyer, a litigator in a courtroom firing back, thinking on his feet. He was able to do that.
Right.
And so I think he scored the most points with that, to tell you the truth, just with the fact that he looked sharp. He didn't look like a withering old man.
Right. Um, and we've had this conversation before because I've said like it's glaringly obvious that he is older and he is slowing down. You can hear it in the way he delivers, the way he speaks. You can see it in the way he moves a little in slow motion. You can see it, but his content is very much on point.
That's
And
just the content, though. I think he had energy. He used a loud voice. He projected his voice. He didn't sound like a dying man.
sure, but we can't walk around like the story of the emperor has no clothes where no one wants to tell him. Like you can see it. It's very clear. And what I like is that he doubled down on that. He leaned into it. He didn't shy away from it when he wrapped up in the end. He's like, look, people say I'm an old guy, right? But you know, whether it's my age is old or we're talking about old ideas, right?
Mhm.
Basically, which one are you going for, right? Yeah, I'm old, but we've got these progressive ideas. We're pushing forward. We're doing making a lot of progress. The other guy, even though he's about the same age as I am, but his ideas are old. He's taking us back. He's
Right.
regressing us, right? There was what a good stark contrast, and I think even afterwards, Biden has come out in a promo ad, and he's doubled down again. He's like, "Look, I'm an old guy."
Yeah.
He's like, "I've got experience. I've been around." And so I think that was a good way to lean into that.
Absolutely. But I still think just on the point of him being this zombie, right? That's how they portray him, especially in right wing circles. And to be
Right.
fair, in far left circles, right? Who, in my estimation, are still bitter that Bernie Sanders wasn't the nominee. And so they're still trying to make it look like Biden should never have been there. Oh, he beat him. He got lucky. He beat him once. He can't beat him twice. What are we doing, guys? We need Bernie or someone like, you know what I mean? That's the vibe you get from them. So you're hearing it from both sides, from the far left and from the right. But I think Biden defied that impression. Sure, he's an 81-year old man, whatever he is,
Right.
and he looks it right, but he doesn't look like someone who doesn't have the energy or the vigor to be president. You know what I mean? And I think his team probably prepped him on that aspect of it, right? The substance is one thing. People are going to like the substance, absolutely, and they always do with him because he is a unifying figure. But
Right.
I think the style, the delivery might have even been more important for this one. I think that's why he was raising his voice as much as he was. Some people even said it sounded like he was yelling. I think that might have been an overcorrection, right? Because he wanted to show that strength and that he wasn't a feeble old man. And I think he achieved that very well.
I think yeah, I think he did really well. And that will, even though there are people who recognize his age, that speech and the way that he delivered it will go a long way to uh curtail a little bit of their concerns over his age because yeah, the substance was great, the delivery was good. I know people point out a few of his fumbles, but he's always fumbled, right?
Right.
He had to overcome stuttering, and no one and I don't think that's brought up a lot enough when they talk about his fumbles. But he's always done that his whole career.
And
But again,
plus, it was an hour plus speech, right? You
yeah,
go
yeah,
watch any president, anyone speaking for an hour plus. I guarantee you're going to find a few fumbles in there, a few stumbles in
right,
there, right? With
sure,
him,
sure,
it's magnified because people are expecting it. So when he does it
right,
once, it's like, oh, we told you, all right? But what about the other 59 plus minutes where he didn't do it?
right. Um, so yeah, there were some excellent lines. He did another chess move, and he's done this before, and I really love it when he does this. Um, when he I forget what the bill was. He mentioned about this bill, and then all the conservatives, he's like, yeah, the conservative they want to bring, or the Republicans want to put forth this bill, and they want to take away this or do that, and they all groaned and whatnot.
Wasn't it the border bill?
It might have been. I don't remember what it was. And
I
he's
think it
like,
was.
"Oh, you don't want that bill? You don't want to do that? That's what's coming across my desk." And they're like, "Oh," he's like, "Oh, you don't want that? That's good news to hear that you don't want that. Great news to hear." And so like he did that in another speech a few years ago
Right.
and basically just played chess with him on that because you can't groan against it if that's what you're actually proposing because now it shows that you're against that. And it was a good way to put them on Front
Yeah.
Street.
But you know what always happens with those They play politics, right? I mean, this is
Sure,
politics. They're
sure.
going to play politics, right? It's it's the word. But what they end up saying is, I was growing in because I disagreed with your characterization of my position, but the reason why I didn't support it was because of this other thing in here, right? For
Right, right,
example,
sure.
maybe it allocates too much money. We both agree that money should be allocated for this issue, but you wanted 50 million and I wanted 49 million. So I had to vote no. Or, you know what I mean? Like they find reasons not to support it, even though they'll tell you that they agree with it on principle.
Sure, but the optics makes it look more like a win for Biden.
Right.
And he outmaneuvered him in that. Um, so I did like I said, a lot of really good lines, and Biden has had a lot of really good speeches. Um, and like he said, what did he say? I will not demonize immigrants and say they're poisoning the blood of our community. I will not demonize people on their faith.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's presidential talk,
Right.
right? That's leadership talk. That's how you want someone who is supposed to be leading a
Yeah.
diverse group of people
Right.
to talk.
Right. I was going to say that's the kind of rhetoric you want to hear from your president.
Absolutely. Absolutely. He
And
mentioned
that's what
some
you will
other,
not get from the other side. Let's be real.
right. Yeah. Another one he said, let's not erase history, let's make history. Right? These are great lines and great sentiments. I
Right.
think applaud that. He
But you
even
see how
mentioned,
that even a line like that will get twisted because then you'll have the conservatives saying, well, but you want to erase history by taking down the Confederate statues, the flag, or whatever, right? They'll try to
right, yeah, yeah,
against it.
yeah, yeah. Um, there was just a lot. So I was definitely happy with his performance. Except the one thing that I was really waiting to hear was because two of the biggest things that are hanging over his head right now, aside from domestic issues, but foreign policy issues, is what's going on with Ukraine, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and then what's happening with Israel and Palestine.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was waiting to hear how he's going to address that. And out the gate, he addressed Ukraine, and that was yeah. I thought he did well there. I didn't
But
like
let's also mention it was powerful that he mentioned his predecessor and his relationship with Putin. And he was like,
right.
he told Putin, do whatever the hell you want, right? That's an
Right.
important message.
No, absolutely. It's an absolute and it sends a very negative message to our allies in NATO for who could potentially be the next leader of the US on what kind of support that they're going to get in this alliance. And yeah, that was very important to make out there. I didn't like that he didn't call for a ceasefire in Palestine. I understand why he might not have been able to do it or might been difficult to do it because of how close of an ally Israel is, and to
Well,
outright point him out like that in the State of the Union might cause some friction, but I would have preferred that he called for a
right.
ceasefire.
Yeah, and I think that maybe speaks more to the ongoing negotiations for that because it has been the policy of his administration to achieve a ceasefire, right? I mean, he hasn't been shy about that. He said it, and he's got his national security team actively working on that. But
Right.
he did promise, well, not promise, but he did, I guess, predict that it would have been achieved by the end of the weekend a couple of weeks ago, like maybe 2 weeks ago by now. And so that hasn't happened according to the schedule that he put forth. And maybe that might have been why he left it out of the speech because those talks were still ongoing, and he maybe want the pushback of, well, you keep promising this, but you said it was going to be here by now and it wasn't. So you're all talk and no action. So
Right. Well, he
maybe he's
was looking
hoping that it
forward
gets
to.
achieved, right? And then he can come out and talk about the process that went into the negotiations, but maybe he doesn't want to disturb those while they're going on.
Yeah, and like I said, I get that, right? And I know they were also trying to shoot for Ramadan, especially to start. Um, but I would have liked to hear him
Right.
outright say, call for a ceasefire from Israel and at least say it, even though those things are out there. But I understand saying it could have disrupted whatever negotiations are going on behind the scenes that could actually make it happen. So I get that, but that part was disappointing for me.
Yeah.
But I did like, even though he didn't outright call for it, he did kind of put it on. clear, like, look, Israel, you have a responsibility to protect the innocents here. You've got a right to self-determination, but you've also got a right to protect the innocents here, and can't just be, he didn't say specifically you can't just be outright slaughtering people in Gaza, but that kind of puts that out there. And Obama kind of spoke to that some months back, like, there's going to be a change in the world's opinion
Hmm.
and that goodwill that Israel has built up if they continue down this path.
Right. There's a line
So,
to walk there. Obviously, it's a very complicated issue, and you risk alienating large segments of the population with whatever you say, right? But as a
right,
leader, you have to lead on the issue and understand that, right? Yeah, it's a difficult issue, but it does require strong leadership. And I think it's another contrast between what we have now and the alternative, right? If you're looking for that kind of
right,
strong, nuanced leadership, you're not going to get it from the other side.
right. Yeah. And that's, and even if you don't, like, you wanted him to say this, he didn't say this, the what you just said there, I think is really important, is you're going to get this kind of thoughtful and nuanced type of approach, that even though you may not completely agree one way or the other, but the fact that the leadership is thinking in this type of way, keeping these ideas, these progressive or positive, maybe not progressive if you're conservative, but these positive types of ideas on the table, that's what you want from leadership, right? You don't want someone who's going to just be like bullheaded and shut things down, because there are so many different interests that has to be looked into and has to be, worked with.
Right.
So.
Well, as it turns out, the president of the United States is a complicated job and not fit for just anyone off the street. Who knew?
I, I don't know. Yeah, just anybody. I mean, you could go from, like, I don't know, a fryer and drive through straight to the Oval Office. It looks okay.
Listen, this is why the experience matters, right? Some people want to focus on age as a negative, but what is the positive? What is the flip side? He's been
Right.
around for a long time. This is not his first rodeo. He kind of knows what he's doing.
Yeah, and I'll be honest. When he ran, I never thought he had a chance initially, because Biden Biden was, I always had a good feeling about it, right? He's a good guy. He is a good guy. He always seems to have been a good guy, but he just wasn't the front man, right? He didn't give off that I'm the one that you follow. Right? He was a good vice
Yeah,
president. He was a
yeah,
good supporter.
right.
But
Charlemagne had a
talk
line. He
about
said that he has no main character energy at all.
right, and there's nothing wrong with that. But
Right.
he was running to be the main character, and so at first it just didn't seem that way. But I think he's doing really
But
well.
what about this notion? We'll get off this topic and get to the National Guard thing in a second. But this notion that he may be the most transformative president we've had since FDR in terms of his long term achievements. In other words, the CHIPS Act, right? The infrastructure, the things that he's pushing and he's getting done even are maybe not going to produce the fruits of their labor immediately, probably not even in his lifetime now. But generationally speaking, it's going to set the groundwork for a transformed and an improved America in a way that other presidents, probably since FDR, haven't, or maybe since Lyndon Johnson, if you want to be fair about it, haven't been able to achieve.
I think we'll have to see, what happens, and what's allowed to stand and what's not, you
Sure.
know. So
But I think there are some important things that have been achieved, such as chips, right? I think that might be a little esoteric to some people, obscure sounding, but the
right,
idea that we're going to have more manufacturing in America when it comes to our technology, right? Computer chip,
right.
semiconductor chip, as opposed to outsourcing everything to places like China. I think that's very important. I think in our long-term economic and even national security strategy in the U.S.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of companies, a lot of not companies, a lot of countries are taking a good long and hard look at that, especially because last year we had the semiconductor shortage,
Yeah,
um, coming out of the pandemic, and then the world's pretty much relies on Taiwan in this regard as far as producing semiconductor chips. And we've had this shortage, and we had it for a good portion of last year. And so you know, bringing some of that onshore to the US to produce our own chips can, you know, help us so we don't fall into that trap. Japan is looking to do something similar. Matter of fact, about 2 weeks ago, that Taiwan Semiconductor Company opened up a manufacturing plant here in Japan, and they're looking to do another one. You know, Japan used to, before Taiwan, Japan was the world leader in semiconductor manufacturing, but not anymore, nowhere near. And so they're looking to get back into that. So everyone could saw like, you know, we need these chips. This is what a lot of modern life runs on, and this type of shortage is very, you know, debilitating. So we can get back into that and making that, because otherwise, you know, we're gonna have to rely on China or Taiwan, and Taiwan could be going looking at some hard futures with Taiwan's aspirations for it. So people are gonna have to diversify here.
Right, right. So, all right. Well, we'll see how things continue to play out in this election season. But as we said going in, that seemed to be a win for the president. And
I think so.
numbers thus far have been reflecting that, right? But we
And
see things change quickly.
that weird that weird Republican response.
Oh, yeah, that
Jesus,
didn't get the best reception.
what was that? That was crazy.
That was someone who was not ready for prime time, unfortunately.
I think she delivered it just how she practiced it. I think they thought
What's
that
the
that
problem?
was going to be, I think they thought that
She
that was going to be like a home run.
overacting, not credible, just did not do herself or the Republicans any favors.
None whatsoever. None whatsoever. It's oh my God. It's scary. That side is just completely scary. And
All right, well,
and I know there's some Republican like long-term Republicans who are just kind of looking at like what is going on in our party? Like what is happening here?
yeah, yeah. Well, speaking of scary, I think that's a good segue into what has been going on in the New York City subway system, right? Because the governor has deployed National Guard troops to the subway. Of course, we've been
Right.
talking about it here on Nuance, how we've seen an increase in incidents, crime, right, in the subway system. And people are justifiably scared on the system. They're not comfortable taking public transit. That's a problem, right? We talked at the beginning about this funding that we're potentially getting allocated for the Queens Link. Again, it's great to improve the public transit system, but what good is it if you don't have the ridership to
Right.
keep it going, right? If no one wants to take it because too much crime is happening, or there's a perception that too much crime is happening. And so the governor has deployed the National Guard to the subway. And there are some people who are complaining about it. Some people say that they feel safer. Some people not so much. There was a controversy with the long guns, they were calling them. Really, it was reminiscent of 9/11. I think you were around here, Jay, around that
Yeah.
time, where
Yeah.
I'm not sure, were you here when you would see military personnel in
Yeah.
the streets with machine guns? Okay.
Uh in not in the streets, but they were at the train stations.
Okay. Yeah. So I remember shortly after 9/11, you would even see soldiers holding machine guns on the street corners in places like downtown Brooklyn, where I was going to college and whatnot. And I didn't really feel comfortable with that. I think it was doing too much. I understand the need for safety, and maybe you want an increased presence of a certain
Mm.
variety during certain periods. I get that. I'm not rigid on that. I'm flexible. I'm open to these ideas. But I think there is a line where it becomes too much and it actually becomes counterproductive. I remember one time I was walking to class. I would take the Long Island Railroad to Atlantic Avenue at the time, and I walk sometimes to downtown Brooklyn to like Metro Tech where the college was, and I saw a soldier holding a machine gun, bent over, tying his shoes, and the machine gun was pointed right at people as he was tying his shoes, and that didn't make me more comfortable. That actually scared me. I thought, there could be an accident. What if that gun goes off and starts massacring people on the street? So I don't know. Are we in that territory here? In response, I know the governor took a step now to ban these long guns on the system. but obviously the National Guard is still there. So how do people feel about all this?
Well, let me ask you, like I haven't heard the details I heard just in passing that they were deployed, but why? What was the reason of putting them on the street?
Because of the crime issue. People are concerned about
So
crime in
so
the subway.
so they went directly to National Guard instead of the police?
Right.
Like,
Well, she can't. That's the thing, right? This is the tension between the state and the city, and so she's saying that the city isn't doing enough, right? That would be on the mayor and the NYPD. And there are people, yes, and this is part of the discussion. People are saying that the NYPD should be left to do its job. So this is kind of a message by the governor that the city is dropping the ball, and so she's got to step in and bring these folks.
it's interesting, and I remember some of those times, and I think I got there a little bit towards the end of when they were had the military deployed everywhere. And it wasn't as widespread as right after 9/11, but I remember specifically there was a short time period where even in Valley Stream there would be a soldier there with a machine gun at the Valley Stream station. And I noticed, I took stock, and I might have even written about it at that point, but I just noticed how I could see how people would feel very, very uncomfortable with that. I grew up on military bases,
Mhm.
so I'm used to seeing military soldiers around with M16s, and right. So that didn't freak me out just seeing it, but I could see how people who didn't grow up around that, how that would be very scary. Now, having them on the regular street and not on the military base, that was concerning.
Right.
Um,
Do you think it
he-
sends a message subconsciously, even that you're living in a militarized zone? Does it make you actually
yes,
feel like things are more dangerous than they actually are? Does it scare people even more? I mean, because it's a constant reminder of that, and it's
right,
probably it's a symbol of war, right? So it does it make
right.
you feel like you're living in a war zone?
And yeah, right. And there's two conflicting issues I have here with that. One, what authority do the National Guard have? Like if they're there for crime prevention or whatever, but the National Guard doesn't have arrest authority, or they can't detain people, or they shouldn't be able to. Like what actually are they allowed to do? Are they just there as a deterrent?
Mostly a
Are they
deterrent.
going to
Yeah.
try to are they going to try to detain people, arrest people if they do something? Um, and then on the flip side, I can't really say that, if you flood it with NYPD, that I would feel more comfortable. Because I think the National Guard has a higher threshold for engagement than we've seen with NYPD, that I would probably feel more comfortable with more National Guard than NYPD at some points.
Well, let's look at some of the numbers here. So, according to stats that are released, subway crime spiked 45% in January compared to January last year, but it dropped
Mm,
15% in February. It's up 13% overall for the year. But again, you're just comparing year to year here. So we knew last year people were concerned about this as well. And so you have to look at more than just this year and last year. What is the long term arc of this? Um, in response, you've got Governor Hochul deploying National Guard troops. In fact, 1,000 of them, 1,000 National Guardsmen, state and MTA cops. It says there's a law. We talked about this. A law to allow judges to ban transit assault perpetrators from trains and buses. An installation
right.
of CCTV cameras in all train cars and conductor cabins. They're talking about better coordination between NYPD and district attorneys to thwart recidivists, and
Mhm.
$20 million to expand the subway co-response outreach mental health teams. So they're trying to put more funding into the mental health component of this as well. And really, from my perspective, that's what you're seeing a lot of. And I'm really not sure what a militarized or even an NYPD president
Right,
is going to do to stop that, because you're not dealing with people who are of a sound mind. So if you have
right,
someone who is severely mentally ill and doing things like pushing people randomly on the tracks, are they
right.
not going to do that because there's a National Guards member on the other side? Like, I'm really not sure about that.
Right. Yeah, and if this I increase is largely due to mental health issues, yeah, that extra presence won't be a deterrent. It just will be there if someone needs help.
Right.
So I could see the benefit of that for that reason, but yeah, it's not going to stop people from doing it.
Let's see. Of course, the
Yeah,
Post is reporting on this, but we have some quotes from some people riding the subways. One gentleman says he approves of the National Guard on the subway. He says, "We know there is violent crime on the subway and it needs to be stopped." But he continues, "The guns are unnecessary. It's just a display. They have no intention of using them. It's for fear. It's excessive and unnecessary." Then you have a teacher here, young lady, who says that she does feel safer, but she didn't think the firearms were needed. So it seems like people are repeating that point that having more authorities, if you wish, around can be a good thing, maybe even go to for help if you need help. But they didn't think more guns were good. Someone even brought up the idea that what if some of these mentally ill people grab the guns and start shooting people?
right. Yeah, I mean, like I said, for the general public, seeing weapons of war, military weapons, in their general vicinity, in their immediate vicinity, can be very jarring. Seeing machine guns, like you don't see those unless you see them, in a movie or in a war documentary or something like that. So I can understand how people would feel uncomfortable about that because these aren't used for protection. These are used
Right.
for war,
Right. And that's
So
a great question, right? So, all right, let's talk this through. You've got a National Guardsman with a machine gun, right?
mm,
Okay, he spots someone committing a crime. Let's say
right,
it's snatching a purse or something like that. Let's say it's
right,
an assault. Is he supposed to turn his machine gun and start blasting the person who committed that crime? That would seem dangerous. I mean, to me, it would seem likely to be hitting other people too, right? Civilians at that point.
right. Yeah,
And even if he could contain it to the one person, is that the appropriate response? Do we want even police to shoot people on site? And I
right,
understand if maybe they're about to use deadly force, right, to save someone's life. I get that, but what if it isn't at that point? What if
right,
it's an assault? As terrible as an assault is, we don't
right.
want people shooting someone just for hitting someone, right? That's not a proportionate response.
Right. I do think, and as I mentioned before, I do think when you're dealing with military, and I think National Guard probably falls under this as well, that they have a higher threshold for engagement than the police do. Um, whereas we might expect, or we've seen in the past, where police would just start shooting if someone's not complying. I don't think the military or National Guard um, be behave that way.
What
That
really is
doesn't
the
mean that
purpose of the
doesn't mean that
machine
we're
gun?
not going to get someone who will. I'm just
Right,
saying that in
right.
general, I don't think, and someone else
Yeah.
can correct me, I could be wrong, but I don't think that that's how they, you know, would respond.
So, what would be the purpose? I understand they're moving away from these long guns, as they call them, but why would you need someone with a machine gun at all? What are they going to do with that machine gun? Is it just to
It's
scare people?
intimidation. It's intimidation. It's, to try to it's like a deterrent, right?
Yeah,
Like if you got some cops on the street, that's one thing. But if you see this weapon, right? It's a visible deterrent. Like this is a serious area right now. You know what I mean? If it's on the hip and it's in the holster, you've seen that. It's what you're accustomed to.
yeah,
All right. But now you got the guy standing there and he's holding like this. Like I think everyone's gonna feel a little bit of that hair raising in the back of the
yeah.
neck.
I mean, I feel it. I think a normal person is going to feel, but I don't know. Someone who's going to commit a crime, again, they either mentally ill or let's say they're not mentally ill. Let's say they're a professional criminal, right?
Right.
Are they going to have that thought that they're going to turn the machine gun on me, or are they going to think, Shh, come on, this is all for show?
Probably, yeah. I think some might, some will be deterred
Mm-hmm.
by it. I think, and to be on the flip side, you might be able to get away with a little bit more with a National Guard person than you would a cop that's used to the environment, that's used to the psychology of the area, that might be able to pick up on something that uh, uh, a guard might not
Yeah,
because they're always deployed in their area.
yeah.
So, there's I think there's some positive and negatives. I don't think I mean, I don't know how bad it is. I'm not there, but I don't think National Guard sounds like an appropriate response.
That's the thing. It does sound like overcompensating, right? It sounds
Right.
just sounds excessive, whether it is or it isn't. And I think
Right.
psychologically, maybe it is. Maybe it will just put people more on edge. But I do like the idea of taking the guns out of it, right? We don't want everyone getting shot, but or anyone if we can help it. But the idea that more people will get arrested on site for committing crimes, right? Even if it's a mentally disturbed person, they get arrested right away for committing an assault on the subway.
Right.
Maybe that will be a positive, right? Maybe that will be a deterrent. Again, you don't really know when you're dealing with mentally ill folks if anything can deter
Right.
them because they're not in the right mind to begin with. But maybe if that becomes the story that you do something on the subway, there are just so many eyes, there are so many authorities there that you will get arrested right away. Maybe that's a step in the right direction. Maybe that will reduce crime. I don't know. Of course, more needs to be done. It can't just be about law enforcement and policing because that's a reaction, right? That's something that you
Right.
do after the fact or during the fact if you're lucky. But we need more, to truly deter this and to really solve this. I think that's where you look into these mental health resources and these other things that you do to try to get ahead of the issue, right?
And see, I mean, I can't imagine it's all mental health. So there has to be
Right.
a lot of other
Oh, yeah,
factors.
absolutely. A
Those
lot of it
need to
is
be
let's
mitigated.
be honest, tied to economics, right?
Economics,
That's
absolutely.
why when you see, for example, the crime rate actually getting slightly better, well, it's not a coincidence that the economy has been improving,
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
Coming out of COVID. After COVID, what do we see? A huge spike in crime,
Yeah.
right? And I don't know if everyone wants to make that connection, but historically, it's always there. You can always see that crime does
Sure.
go up when the economy drops, and
But
so I
tough
think
times, people do,
right,
feel
it
like they
makes us
have
feel
no
more
hope.
desperate, and it's not an
Yeah.
excuse for anyone, right? No one should be doing it, but the
Right.
reality is you see more of it in those
Right.
times, right? Because it does
Right.
make people feel desperate, and you could say bring
Sure.
out the worst in them or whatever, but it happens there, and
Sure.
so when we look at long-term solutions, we have to be thinking about that. We need to be thinking about
Absolutely.
the economy, right? Economic factors, jobs, employment, mental health aspect, all of that needs to be part of better
Absolutely.
education, all of these things. And these are our long-term plays. In the short term, yeah, we do need to deal with the problem as it is this now. We can't ignore it. We can't say, oh, it'll be better in 5 years. No, we do, we have to do what we can
Right.
to reduce it and mitigate it now. And so I applaud some of these efforts. Are they
Right.
going too far? Maybe in certain ways. I tend to agree that the big guns were a step too far. But it's I guess uh, something worth commending that there is an effort to be on top of this issue and do something here. What do you think
Right.
about the cameras? Because I put up a post recently talking about cameras that were finally being installed here locally in Charles Park, and I've been working on that issue for a long time. You have some people who are cynical who will say cameras don't do anything because people will commit the crimes. Okay, great, you got them on camera, but by the time you do something, they're gone.
I think they can be useful. And they may not stop things in the moment, deter a few folks from doing something. If someone's gonna do something and they don't care, they might not care, but it can help to catch people once something is done and get some justice. So yeah, I would probably roll them out first in the highest risk areas, the ones that have had the most violence,
Mm-hmm.
and just gauge their effectiveness and then see, how to progress from there.
Sure, sure. Also keeping in mind, of course, that we don't want to live in a nanny state, right? So you have to find that
Right.
balance. You
Well,
know,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
you don't
absolutely.
want to be in 1984 in 2024.
Absolutely. Like I think we don't want to be like what is it downtown Wall Street area, right? That's like the ridiculously surveilled area.
Mm-hmm.
There's like a whole big control center down there, and it's like
Well,
every inch of it
downtown
is
by the World Trade Center, right? You would
right,
expect it to be there,
right.
but
Or we don't
or the
I
financial
don't think
financial center. But
we don't want to be like London either, right? Where like pretty much every inch of that place is surveilled, right?
right, right, and then we see issues like, for example, speed cameras everywhere. A lot of people
Right.
aren't happy about that, and they'll say, "Well, there are too many cameras around, and
Right.
whatever happened to old-fashioned police actually pulling you over for speeding as opposed to trying to catch everyone every 5 seconds going too fast."
Yeah, yeah. That's not very good either, but you know.
But yeah, there, I can tell you, for example, in Ozone Park over here, we've dealt with a spike in crime coming off of the subway, right? People getting
Mm,
mugged in dimly lit areas coming off the A
mm.
train. And the local community overwhelmingly wanted better lighting and more cameras around as
Right,
a deterrent and as a way of catching people, because it is often the same people repeating these crimes. And so, okay,
right,
maybe they get away with it the first time, but if you have them on camera now, and the area is well lit enough where you can see them. Hopefully, it's a deterrent. But if it isn't, now you have that record, and hopefully, it does provide some assistance in catching that person going forward.
right. Better and better, yeah, better lighting. This should not be a dimly lit area of the public subway system. Like it
Right.
just that's you know.
Right.
So they should get in there and fix some things. And I mean, the whole New York subway system needs a complete revamp and
It
overhaul.
does.
Complete.
It does. No, we're so behind the times, and we have been for.
It's over 100 years old. It needs to be,
But this is New York City, and this is New York State. We like to think of ourselves as leaders.
right,
Why are we so behind when it
right,
comes to our public transit? It doesn't make any kind of sense. It bothers me deeply. And it
right,
isn't just a matter of transit. It's not just a matter of, oh, you want to get to work faster or be on a nicer train or whatever. No, it really is tied to all of these issues, in my opinion.
right,
Right. And
right.
it's our infrastructure. It's
Sure.
symbolic of who we are as a city and as a state. And it's
Right.
just embarrassing to me. I mean, you live in Japan with, what do you call that? The Shinkansen? Is that what you call it?
Shinkansen.
Shinkansen with the bullet train.
Right.
We
Yeah.
have nothing like that. We've been talking about it forever in the US. Why can't we get from New York to DC in under an hour by train?
It's
We should be
it's
able
so
to.
convenient. It's so convenient. It's just
Right.
and
Think
and
about what that will do.
and we do have Amtrak, but it's underutilized and I've ridden Amtrak. I like it. I think it gets a bad rap. Um we just don't think about using trains like that.
Right.
And it's very limited where it goes. But
Think about the economic development. I know someone in the comments was asking about jobs, right? Forget even the jobs created by building this infrastructure. What
right,
about the businesses you would be able to operate? You could live in New York, get to DC conveniently in under an hour. You could easily open up a business in DC. Right? There's just so many more things that you could do. You could travel there and go out there for dinner. Imagine that. I'm gonna have dinner with my family in DC tonight because I can get there in under an hour. What does
right,
that do for the economy of both New York and DC and everywhere in between potentially? Right? There are so
right,
many possibilities that opens up by having us be more interconnected, and we're
right.
so being so behind is just holding us back in so many ways. And I would even argue, you take an issue like crime, this has something to do with it. It's not everything, but it plays a role. Right? It plays its
Sure.
part. And I think improving all these issues, which again, going back to the State of the Union, the president is looking at these long-term issues.
Right,
I think these are going to improve the quality of life for everyone in the long run by improving these components, right?
right.
Let us be more interconnected as a world and as a society, and think about the doors that opens up, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the subway is a really good place to start, especially for infrastructure in New York because it's so heavily relied upon. It could be modernized. It probably would, I mean, again, you'd say it would create jobs. It would create better infrastructure, set New York up for another 100 years, uh, and just not only keep it up with the times, it'd probably be more cost effective at some, with how it is. So,
Right, absolutely. Attract more people to come and open up businesses here and utilize this infrastructure. It's we're in a 21st century world, but our city is really not equipped for the possibilities that world provides, right? And that's holding us back, holding our growth and our potential back by so much.
right, right, absolutely.
Um,
So,
all right, well, why don't we make this the poll of the week so we can see what people think about the National Guard?
sounds like the dog wants to make the poll question of the week.
Yeah, I think the dog wants some water or something. I'll get to him in a second. So let's all right, let's do this. The poll question of the week is: do you agree with the National Guard being deployed to the New York City subway system? And we'll see what people say on that. I'm gonna check the dog's water and food in a second here. So while I do that, we had poll results from last time to cover. Was it from 2 shows ago now?
It was from 2 shows ago.
Yeah.
From 2 shows ago. We didn't get a chance to get to the poll results last week, but we asked the poll results from 2 weeks ago was, do you agree that state legislators should have the option of voting down proposed legislative maps made by independent district commissions? And this is from the show where we were talking about petitioning beginning in New York without the district lines being drawn and how that could really disrupt campaigning. It could be a burden on voters, and that this was an ongoing problem. We had actually faced a similar issue in 2012 in that first campaign that we ran. And so we asked this question, we put it out to the people, and 78% said no, they don't agree that they should have the option to vote down proposed legislative maps. 12% said yes, 10% said I don't know. So largely people think that that they shouldn't be able to overwrite these
Yeah.
independently voted on maps.
Right. It
Someone
makes
said,
sense. Go ahead. Let's see the comments.
I was going to say, just one of the comments here was saying that redistricting should be based solely on enclosing equal numbers of citizens. Party affiliation should be irrelevant, and this information should be restricted from the commissions. District
It
boundaries
should
should
be
be
restricted.
drawn. Huh?
No, that's funny. It should be the information should be restricted from them.
Yeah, I guess in that way that they don't know the party affiliation, then they can't be really biased towards it.
Yeah. I mean,
If you
sure.
do
As a
that though,
fundamental principle, the idea is to draw districts of roughly equal populations, and it sounds simple enough, but
right,
our geography isn't rectangular. I mean, we don't have,
right,
you know, what I mean, we have crazy land and water boundaries. I mean, look at New York City as an example, Long Island, all these, all these different areas. The whole country is like this, and so you have to have a way of drawing them equitably, and it isn't as simple as, well, you start counting people and then you draw a line. I mean, so every line has to be what, north south or east west exactly, and then what does that do? That's not going to be equitable. That's an arbitrary way of drawing a line. Drawing a
right,
district at that point, just because you want better geometry, right? So
right. I
it's
think it was
always more
more,
complicated than people want it to be.
yeah, but I think it's also more like another comment here is saying that legislators have too much stake in the outcome to be dictating the outcome. And
Right.
that's what, these independent commissions drawing the lines are for, because otherwise people are going to draw it to favor their own
Yeah,
party and their own
absolutely. And
interests.
it is kind of funny, let's be real, that you have this independent commission, which was voted on by the voters, right? A referendum of the people. The people of New York said, yes, we want this independent redistricting commission to draw lines more equitably and in a way that reduces the political influence from the process. So,
Mm,
with that being established, you still have the legislature having the authority to say,
right.
nah, thanks, but no thanks. We're going to do things our way. So it seems to defeat the purpose in a way,
A
right?
little performative.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, Another comment here says legislators should be left out of the redistricting process. The court should be able to enforce the mandate of the commission. If the
Mm.
court rules the commission failed its duty, the commission itself should rework the maps. Michigan leaves the legislature out of the process, and it seems to work so far. Um, that's another way to go about it.
Of this.
I
So,
think that legislators should be left out of it because we've seen what they do when they're in it.
right. And I do like the idea of the independent commission. I don't like the idea of letting the courts, as a matter of practice, draw the
Mm,
lines every time. That isn't
right,
their function.
right,
Now, I think it is the function of the courts to determine if something is constitutional or not, if something is done
Right.
in accordance with the law. And so that can be an avenue. And, I like that. I think we kind of landed on that last time we spoke about this, where
Right.
you have the independent commission, they propose their maps. You can take the legislators out of it, but you can give people the option, including legislators if they wish, to file lawsuits. And they're not filing lawsuits saying that the districts are politically disadvantageous to them or whatever. They're doing it to make true legal arguments, plausible arguments that they were drawn in an unconstitutional or unlawful way. Now, sure, some are going to maybe do it in a cynical way,
They're
and
all going to.
they're not going to like the right, but that's what the court has to decide, right? If there is merit to that or not. So
Right.
they can do it cynically and say, I just don't like this map. Can we sue? Then you need a good
Right.
lawyer to say, well, we have a case or we don't have a case. And, then they can go to court and go through the process. But the court isn't deciding, is this going to harm this incumbent's chances of reelection? The court
Right.
is looking at the legal analysis and saying, listen, there are certain mandates that are in the law that must be followed. For example, the one person, one vote principle that per the 14th Amendment's equal protection clause, a voter in one district should have the same power as the voter in another district, which means that the districts have to be roughly of equal population. Otherwise, you have
Right.
proportionate power, right? Voting power. And so if the independent district commission were to come back and propose these districts where one district was wildly more populated than another, you would have a valid legal claim that, hey, what are you doing? You're violating the 14th Amendment with these maps. I think that makes sense, right? But for them to just arbitrarily shoot down the maps and say, we like it like this better, I think that becomes problematic.
Right. One person brought up a point here. Get your idea here. They said this is where AI could be very useful. Algorithms like setting boundaries that define regions with a narrow population range are exactly the kind of thing AI is excellent at. So what if there was just AI were drawing these maps and no one had a hand in it? And it was given the mandate that they had to be even and equal.
Who programs the AI and what is the AI looking
Well,
for?
if the code is open source and the bipartisan group can
But
agree
so what
agree
you're
on
saying
that this
is,
is what the algorithm is going to do. It's going to draw these lines to make sure that there is a balance of these type of voters and these type of voters within this region, and it has to be congruent. So it's not like it's like blotches everywhere, and then no one's in the middle of it.
right, but then you're saying that instead of politicians drawing the lines, computer programmers drawing the lines, essentially.
No, just an algorithm. The program is set up once.
But the algorithm has to be programmed. And what is it looking for? How
It's
is
looking to
it
make sure
programmed?
that there's a balance of voters in that area. I mean, if they're drawing the maps based on um, voters for parties, then you would feed
It's
in the voting
Yeah,
rolls.
but okay, but it's more complicated than that, though, right? The process is more complex, and there are certain factors that can be considered. For example, there is an interest in keeping counties together to the extent possible, or keeping neighborhoods together to the
That can all
extent
be
possible.
programmed into it. That can all be
Yeah, but there's
programmed.
different weights that can be assigned that, right? I mean, so ultimately, someone is making the decision as to how to set up this algorithm.
Yeah. Well, I mean, all of those things can be programmed into the algorithm.
But that's what I'm saying. So that becomes a political decision in a sense.
Well, if that once the algorithm is completed, it doesn't need to be changed, right? It doesn't have to change every time. It has to be agreed upon first, and the code can be open source so they can see that this is not, there's nothing going on in the code here, that the algorithm follows these specific parameters
Mhm.
to draw a fair outcome.
Do you think that the voters of New York, because it is a constitutional amendment at this point, you think the voters of New York would vote to repeal the independent commission and replace it with an AI algorithm?
That I do not know. I think at some point it's going to be proposed and used somewhere in the country,
Uh,
as much as AI is getting integrated in everything.
I'm just stuck with the principle that someone has to program this, right? And these
Well,
are
yeah.
political decisions that go into it. So it isn't like a math equation, right?
Well, it's
It's
the same thing as the independent commission. Someone has to make those decisions.
But
This is
these are
just
people and they're bipartisan, right? So you have Republican interests there, Democratic interests, and they're supposed to come to some kind of compromise. And they're looking at all different factors and they're determining how much weight to put on each factor. And it's often a case by case basis, too, depending on the needs of that particular area. I mean, there are certain things that I don't think AI is going to really going to be able to capture the nuance of the way that a person would be able to.
it's potentially true. As things progress, they could get even more advanced and they could be. It might be something to look into, or maybe even a starting point, right? Have the AI spit out proposed maps, and then the independent commission works off of that, and then makes the decisions.
Yeah.
You know,
Honestly, I
it's,
wouldn't be surprised if some of them are already looking at that, right?
I wouldn't be
You're
surprised
commissioner.
either.
Yeah, you're one of these commissioners and you're trying to come up with ideas. Why not? I probably would. I would maybe run through some AI or just some computer algorithms in general, just thinking, how might it look if we looked at these different factors?
Right,
Um, and it wouldn't be the final result necessarily, but it could be a starting point. It could be something just to get the
right,
juices flowing creatively. Thinking, oh, look at this. This is interesting. Right.
right. And to wrap up this discussion on this topic here, there was one last comment that I wanted to point out, which I thought was a refreshingly good one. He said, if I'm being completely honest, I probably should have answered, I don't know. It's very possible, very in bold. There are legal considerations I'm unaware of. I have no idea how independent commissions are vetted to be truly independent, etc.
Right.
So I
Right.
think I think that's a good take and good thing to admit, because these are very complicated processes that, as you were just pointing out, there are so many other factors that go into it that a lot of people aren't aware of.
Mm-hmm.
And it's okay to say I don't know.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
there's stuff
And,
going
and
on here that I'm
this
not
is maybe somewhat controversial as well, but we saw in the comments there people focusing on the party makeup of the voters.
right.
But another factor that does get considered, and the courts have ruled that it is lawful to consider this, are other demographics, like for example, the ethnic makeup of
Right.
voters.
That's
And
yeah.
and what you see is
Probably income, I would imagine income as well.
sure, but what you see is, as an example, a district where you have all white members, even though they're representing neighborhoods that are all of another ethnicity. For example, in Richmond Hill, right, there's a very big Indo-Caribbean population, but Richmond
Mhm.
Hill itself is carved up into, I think, about 7 different assembly districts where you have many white members representing them. And
Mhm.
there was always a push for why don't we get districts that have all of Richmond Hill or more of Richmond Hill in that area, that general area, included together so that they as a community have more voting power. It's a voting block. It's not as diluted, right? And then you might have, for example, a South Asian member representing a South Asian community, right? And
Right.
there are some people who disagree with that notion and they say that
Sure.
shouldn't even be a consideration. You should just go from east to west or whatever and let the chips fall where they may. But the courts have ruled that it is a factor you can consider. You can consider the effect because let's be honest, what often happens is these districts get drawn intentionally to dilute the voting power of some of
Right.
these more marginalized communities, right? And so, as a way to counteract that, you can say it is lawful to consider that. It's lawful, and that's just one factor. It's also
Right.
lawful to consider the neighborhoods and the counties, right? For example, you don't want a ton of districts that are part Queens, part Nassau, part New York City, part not New York City, because that complicates things. And then you have
Right.
maybe too diverse of interest that the same person would be in charge of trying to manage, right? It might make more sense to have a district that's all in Queens, right? Because now you're dealing with more common issues. So these things all count, right? They all go into the equation here. Even neighborhoods, right? We saw that Howard Beach, for example, was formerly represented by the same state senator as of the last maps carved up. And now you've got multiple senators. I think it's 3, at least 3, representing Howard Beach. And understandably, people in Howard Beach feel like they've lost a lot of their voting power
Right.
because each
It's been
senator
diluted.
is going to be a third as responsive to them as before. Whereas before,
Right.
their one senator would be listening to them, right? They would have more people in the neighborhood being able to put pressure on that elected official. Whereas now it's like it could be seen as an afterthought. Let's say your district has, you know, mostly all Brooklyn neighborhoods and a little tiny bit of Howard Beach. As an elected official, you might feel like those Howard Beach constituents are less important. As
Right.
right as messed up as that sounds, I think that's almost a common response to that, right? Because they're trying to prioritize their time. Should I go to my meetings in this part of the district or that part of the district? Well, if all of a sudden you have a very tiny constituency in your district, you might feel like I can win without any of their votes, really, right? And
Yeah.
so that does affect decision making, and it affects the power that certain communities and constituencies have. And so all of
Absolutely.
these things have to be looked at, I think, when you draw these lines.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So interesting poll results. And definitely something to think about and work on and try to make better so that ultimately the voters benefit and,
Right.
democracy benefits. So
Yeah.
I think we've come down to the bottom line.
Mm.
And I think I did the bottom line last week. So I think it's a Scala bottom line this week.
Okay. Well, I was trying to think of common threads to tie the discussion together. I think
Mhm.
unity was one that came up, right? Trying to do things that have positive long term effects to improve people's quality of life, which are really outside the partisan sphere. Of course, politics plays a role in everything, and you can never completely divorce politics from anything, especially anything in politics, right? It's inherent, baked into the cake. But with that said, we should be looking at ways to unite us by implementing smart long term strategies, which, by the way, I think go a long way towards reducing polarization. Because if we all enjoy a better quality of life, if we all feel more secure, more comfortable, feel like we have more access to the American dream, however that might look to each of us, I think we're going to be less on edge, less at each other's throats, right?
Mhm.
Less in our own bubbles. We're by definition going to be more united, and that can only be a positive thing for everyone.
Absolutely. Excellent sentiment and one that I think would definitely benefit everyone in the country as well. So
Yeah.
good good bottom line this week, and people can find us on all sorts of social media. So YouTube, where they get the replays of this video and this discussion. You can also check us out on Instagram, um, causing some trouble up in Reddit. Um, and everywhere podcasts are available, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, and your own device. If you're subscribed, it just comes right to it. So sounds good.
There you go. As always, thank you for checking us out. We've got work to do, and we'll catch you next time.